How are you? Thank you so much for making the time.
Oh, thank you for
Thank
having
you
me.
for having me.
Evie, I want to start with you because I wanted to get this story before we start talking about the book. And if I'm not mistaken, it's a good one. Can you tell me about the first time you met Yusef?
Well, I met Yusef in college. We've told this story a gazillion times already. Um, I met Yusef in 1999 when he walked into one of my college classrooms. And our professor at the time immediately knew who he was. So she embraced him and said something to the effect of, I knew you all didn't do it. And we didn't know who she was talking about. And eventually we found out that he um, was a member of the Central Park Five jogger case. And it was a huge case in New York City when I was growing up. It changed the landscape of our city for better or for worse, actually. And as soon as I found out who he was, I went after him because I was the features editor for my college newspaper, and I desperately wanted to get an interview. I ended up talking with him for a very long time afterward, but I never got that interview. And interestingly enough, we ran into each other 3 years ago while I was promoting my one of my young adult novels, and I noticed he was selling his book of poetry, and it was self-published. And I was shocked that he had not told his story in book form because I was in an atmosphere where social justice books for young readers were being published, and there was a need for those kinds of stories. And here he was. I knew what happened to him at 15 and 16, and he had not yet told his story. So it was just a matter of collaborating, and Punching the Air was born.
Yusef, how long after your exoneration and release from prison did you start writing and public speaking? And perhaps, but what made you want to start doing more of that?
Well, I've actually been writing poetry probably since probably before 12 years old. I wanted to be a young hip hop artist. And at the age of 12, I remember walking up the block from the school I was going to, LaGuardia High School at the time, and picking up back then what was called a rap application from ASCAP Records, and got cold feet. Just literally, I was like, man, shucks, I didn't. And so, when I got arrested, it was really an unfortunate kind of situation in that I had the opportunity to really share my story through my voice. And it was me standing up for myself, especially at the sentencing, saying, look, not me. I stand accused. And the beautiful thing about that was that I found power in telling my story, even though it was at that moment. It took another maybe 10 years going to prison, after prison, coming home and trying to find my feet, trying to get my legs, so to speak, of really trying to make something of myself. Because I was hiding in plain sight. I did not want to really reveal who I am and who I was, because it wasn't a popular thing to be known as back then we were known the Central Park Five, you know. And I started talking really about the death penalty, because one of the things that I really realized very early on was that Donald Trump, in his taking that full page ad out in New York City's newspapers, calling for the cities to kill us, it was really the legal lynching mechanism of the day. It was his participation that gave way for really what we see now and what we've kind of coded as white supremacy, white male dominance that has plagued America, you know? And I just found so much power in being able to stand up and be counted. People found so much power in seeing me and saying, wow, you give me strength. And that really has helped me move forward.
I want to talk a little bit about this book, and it's aimed towards a younger generation, a generation that wasn't even born on the day of I Stand Accused. Ibi, can you tell me about Amal? Can you tell me about the character in this book?
Amal would not have come to fruition without Yusef being the real person that he is. So Amal is based on Yusef as a 16-year-old boy. What I know of Yusef is that he was a very artistic kid with big hopes and dreams. when he shared the pants that he was wearing on that fateful night in Central Park, I just knew that Amal had to be a passionate artist, because on those pants were illustrations and words and just Yusef sharing aspects of himself that he wore as art and as fashion. So this is the kind of kid Amal is. He is passionate about expressing himself, and he's a art student, and he's studying art history. And he doesn't find he's not connecting to what the teachers are teaching him in school. So that's part of what fuels his rage a little bit. But he is an average kid in the sense that he gets angry. Maybe he turns to violence sometimes because he has no way of speaking out his truth, and he is experiencing oppression. So what happens one fateful night is that it gets the best of him, but he is charged with something that he did not commit, in the same way that he is charged with a crime that he's not commit, in the same way that Yusef went through the system and it failed him. So the system fails Amal. But the story is not about race or criminal justice or juvenile justice or mass incarceration. It is about a boy and how he processes what is happening to him. It is a very, very close look at the human experience through the 16-year-old boy, and how he uses his art to empower himself and find redemption for the next day.
What art can do and the power that art can have. I want to talk, speaking artistically, about the decision to start the book with a birth. I wonder if you could talk to that for me.
That was my idea. So I asked Yusef, how is it that he feels that he is writing this book with a woman? And he adamantly told me that he is A-okay with it. Actually, he prefers it because it was his mother that was that was his rock, he says. That was his hero, his shiro. And I wanted to speak to the fact that this boy, very much like Yusef and other children in our society, are born and someone takes care of them, someone nurtures them, and someone has hopes and dreams for them. But that does not stop the injustices in our society from taking away that dream. And I just wanted to focus on the fact that he is born human and he is born free. And the fact that he is born at home is one of the ultimate acts of freedom that his mother can instill in him.
That humanity in the early birth is the early birth, but you know what I mean. The early start stages of the book where there's a birth is so powerful. And Yusef, we've sort of been dancing around this a little bit because, like I said, Amal's story is not exactly your own, but it rhymes with your story. And as Ibi just said, it was influenced by your story. So in helping tell the story, how much did you find yourself revisiting your own experience?
Oh, every time, every moment. It was really a liberating type of experience to go into it and really dive into, say, what happened to me in prison? How did I survive? All of the things that really makes my story very unique and almost life-giving to all of the people that are experiencing tragedy like that. Talking about my mom from the perspective of her also being in prison as well. And what is it like when you are looking at an individual saying this person is going to go to jail, but you don't realize that that person comes with a whole family and a whole community. And so when you pull at the fabric of that fiber, you leave gaping holes. And once those holes are there, you can never repair the fabric that has holes pulled out that way. You have to get a whole new fabric, And what happens in society is that's what we see. We see all of these experiences kind of having a domino effect of sort all throughout. But for me, it was great to tell the story of injustice, to tell the story of liberation, to tell the story of hope, to tell the story of art, to tell the story of why we need art in school. All of those really powerful pieces of information are there in a very, great way. I say that this is a gift that keeps on giving. This book is life-giving in a way for people that find themselves going through a tragic experience like Amal.
I'm trying to figure out how to ask this question. I think there's a lot of focus paid to the fact that you do tell your story. But I wonder if I could ask you a bit about how you choose to. Like when you started speaking about your experience, when you started speaking about your exoneration and your wrongful sentencing and your life afterwards, I imagine it had to take some sort of like direction or some perspective that you say, okay, this is how I want to frame my story for others. And I want to focus on that word life-giving, the idea that I want to frame my story so that it's somehow life-giving. I wonder if you could speak to that, not just to like that you tell your story, but how you choose to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, my hero is Nelson Mandela. And hearing him once say that he had to leave anger and bitterness in the prison because if he took it outside with him, it would destroy him. He was known to say that he said, being angry and bitter is like drinking poison and expecting your enemy to die. And then I heard the life-giving words of Dr. Maya Angelou, who in a way, it sounded like she was having a conversation with Nelson. And what she said was, you should be angry. You know, because one of the things that we realize with anger is anger causes you to change your situation. You won't change your condition until you're angry about the condition that you're in. But she said, you should be angry, but you must not be bitter. Bitterness is like a cancer. It eats upon the host. It doesn't do anything to the object of its displeasure. And then she teaches us how to become alchemists in our own lives, how to take the lemons that life gives us and make lemonade, how to rather, instead of go through something, but grow through something. And she says, take that anger and dance it and march it and vote it and talk it. And when she said talk it, I said, wow. You know, when I began to use my voice to tell my story, I found out that there were so many people giving me the proverbial high five, hugging me, thanking me for standing up, for sharing, because it gave them the opportunity to stand up in their own lives and share, you know, talk about their loved ones, talk about personal experiences that they have gone through already. And the most powerful thing is that now here we are 31 years later, and I've been given this platform where it's very celebrity-like, you know? But instead of becoming the regular celebrity, I've looked at my life and story and said, my life is for everyone. My purpose in life is to give back and to share and to uplift and to let everybody know that you were born on purpose and you have a purpose. And so, yeah, it gives us the opportunity, you know, to make sure that we don't move throughout our lives as if we are a mistake.
I mean, all I can go think about while you're saying this is, my God, if anyone had the right to be bitter, if anyone had the right to be cynical, it would be you. It is heartening to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I think most people say to me, you know, they wouldn't be angry if I was either. But the fact that, you know, we've been told lately, like when things go low, don't go with them. Take the high road. You know, it's better to do that. It feels better. It's more gratifying. And then later on in life, you realize that you were on the right side of history.
E.B., at the beginning of our conversation, you said this book is not about criminal justice. This book is not about systemic racism. But I mean, these things are in this book. I mean, these were things that I was thinking about while I was reading this book. So I wanted to know, and when you characterize this book is about humanity, I can't help but think about the way you want to talk about issues that are sometimes perhaps challenging for young adult readers, like systemic racism, like criminal justice, and how you might speak to that audience. Like what's a method you use to speak to some of these issues while speaking to a young audience?
Well, I think poetry is a powerful way to start because we're able to say something profound in very few words. And the way that we can do that is through emotion, through raw emotion. And poetry allows us to tap into that raw emotion. I have to constantly reiterate that the inspiration for this was not just Yusef's story, but Yusef's poetry. So there were poems in his self-published book that he wrote while incarcerated that gave me an insight into how he was processing what was happening to him. And even as a teen, he had an understanding of these lofty ideas that he tried to make sense of it through words and poetry. And this also comes from us growing up in New York City and listening to early hip hop, what we used to call conscious hip hop, the sort of political rap that conveyed a message, a broader message. And before in the US, before East Coast, West Coast dynamics, we had conscious hip hop and materialistic hip hop. And conscious hip hop addressed things like, at the time, it was addressing Nelson Mandela and free South Africa and ending apartheid, right? And KRS-One rapping about learning your history, and Public Enemy talking about fight the power. And these were part of our childhood, and it allowed us to process social justice issues. So when it came to writing, we could do the same for ourselves. And we did that as teens. And I wanted to update that same sort of sentiment for Amal in 2020. He understands what's happening in the world, and he's trying to process that and apply it to himself. He knows that the 13th Amendment means that there's still slavery, and he's still here, right? He's still here. And there's a part where he says, but here we are, right? I know all these things, but here we are, blind Lady Justice. I see you too. So that it's art, again, going back to the power of art. It's not just healing. It is a way to process. It is a way to understand, and it is redemptive as well.
Yusef, you could not have planned when this book was going to come out necessarily. You could not have planned that this was the moment that this book was going to come out. What do you think this book might add to this moment of uprising, this moment of reckoning that we're having right now?
One of the things that I've always, wrestled with was the notion and the idea of fixing a system that is designed to work the way it's working in America, that it's not broken. And so today, yesterday we were talking about, reform. And today now we're talking about abolition. We're talking about imagining a world where we correct all of the ills, all of the problems, all of the issues of the day. Because we're fighting really a battle where it's spiritual wickedness in high and low places. The great thing about this book is that this book gives us an opportunity to pull up a chair to the seat at the table, the proverbial seat, and to really have the conversation, to provide answers, to give water to the seeds in all of us that need to be nurtured and grown into the mighty oak trees that we are to become. Because every single one of us is our ancestors' wildest dreams. And so as we take the baton in this marathon of life, making the marathon continue, it is important that we have pieces like Punching the Air, that can give life and word and speech to the problem and the issues of the day. We hadn't planned it that way, but look at life. It's amazing that we're able to talk about things like a gentrifying neighborhood, to expound upon the fact that when folks come into these spaces, especially younger people, they think that they are the ones that are discovering a place that has already been there. And then the issues that come around with regards to that. To talk about the school to prison pipeline and the fact that arts and all of the things that are associated with that are being pulled and stripped, not only from the schools, but from also the prisons, right? The fact that prisons, they can base the number of prisons that they want to create based on people's fourth grade scores in school. It's a tragedy. And at this time, it's about figuring out positive ways to uplift as opposed to pull down. And I think that that's what this book is going to do.
AB, I want to touch on something Yusef just said there. What did you want to say to Black children in this book about, he mentioned the school to prison pipeline, about Black children and the prison system in the United States?
I think so this is where, yes, there is a conversation about mass incarceration, that it is a fine thread that is an underlying part of the story. I think we want to let young people know that it is not enough to just be aware, right? There are a lot of young people engaging with social media. They want to let the world know that they know what's happening. They can connect the dots. They can say something loud. But what else do you do with that? It's not just going out on the streets and protesting. I think there is so much value in stepping away for a little bit and figuring out how you apply it to your personal life. What happens when we turn off our devices, when we shut down the screens? How do we contend with our personal lives to start to make sense of what's happening in the larger society? So Yusef, when he was on the Oprah show, Oprah had asked him, well, how did you deal? How did you make it through? Something to that effect. And Yusef was probably the only one who gave a 2-word answer. And he said, I meditated. How many young people do you know? Like, I don't see it often. They're saying that they're meditating or they're going in to figure out the world. Yusef was afforded that. I don't want to say it was an opportunity, but there was no choice but to go into that quiet space and create something new. And that something is himself. There is a process of rebirthing over and over again, so that by the time you get to go out into the world and say what it is that you need to say, there is wisdom and depth in what you're saying. Because it could easily be an echoing chamber with young people voicing their opinions.
It reminds me of this great quote I read the other day about solitude, that the idea that we think that being in a cabin by ourselves and reading is solitude, but it's not. We can experience solitude on our own. We can experience solitude on the subway car, in traffic. Solitude is just not having media, not having voices at us, is having time with our own thoughts. And it is important for me to clarify that the solitude imposed on Yusef is tragic and criminal and awful. But I do appreciate what you're saying, Evie, that solitude itself, I mean, it's something we had, not to sound like an old fart here, but it's something we had for a very, very long time. We had moments of solitude. It's meaningful to hear you say that, especially as someone who speaks to young people.
And I want to add that we are of a certain age, right? We have teenagers. We're parents of teenagers ourselves. So it was a lot of work to make the voice of Amal very accessible to the teens of today. But we are coming with some of, the old school wisdom too. When we weren't plugged into our devices, we were in college together and we had to read very thick books very closely. No one forced us. We wanted to read. As a poet, you wanted your poetry to have depth to it. So you had to learn more in order to have better metaphors, right? Or to drop some science, as we used to say. So we wanted to read, and we had time to actually read and highlight passages and write in the margins.
Like what? What was a book that challenged you when you were in college?
Well, our professor wrote this book, and it's obscure. It's obscure because she was very radical and she wanted to support Black presses, independent presses. So it was called Urugu, an African-centered critique of European cultural thought and behavior. And it's 700 to 800 pages long, and I still have my copy.
Yusef, is the same answer for you? Is that a book that challenged you?
I still have my copy as well. That book, I would say, Black Power by Amos Wilson. I mean, we have so many, the Iceman Inheritance, Facing Mount Kenya, The Spirit of Intimacy. I mean, the list goes on and on. If I took you down to my library, it's really crazy because we have books that it's almost like a dying thing to see a library in a person's house. But the great thing about it is that we also give opportunity to add to people's libraries with our book, right? And to share it in that way. Hopefully becoming a classic.
It is a real gift to be able to give yourself to a book and give yourself to deep reading and give yourself to all the thoughts of your own experiences and everything you've ever read and listened to and thought about while you're reading a book. And your book certainly can give people that opportunity. I want to thank you both for sharing your story today, for all the talk of change and hope. And I feel like a very optimistic and realistic conversation today. I do want to go back to something that Yusef said at the beginning of our conversation when he brought up the current president of the United States, Donald Trump, and he talked about how Trump had taken out a full-page ad in the newspaper calling for your death. Calling for the death of the now known as the Exonerated Five, then known as the Central Park Five. He has not apologized even now. He has not recanted his belief in your guilt. and he's currently running for re-election. He'll be speaking tonight on national television. So I'll make it as broad as I can, Yusef. I mean, how are you just feeling in this moment?
I'm feeling empowered and energized about our ability to be the change that we seek. You know, people ask me all the time, you know, are you waiting for an apology from Donald Trump? And absolutely not. I am not waiting for an apology. The great thing about understanding our ability to forgive someone, especially if we are never going to be given an apology from the person who hurt us in that way, is that we surgically remove the ball and chain that is holding us back. We give ourselves the ability to move forward in spite of, right? And the great thing about it is that we can thank God that we don't look like what we went through and what we've been through. Because imagine if at every moment I was saying, hey, remember me? You did this. And like, I truly don't believe Donald Trump even thinks about us. And so it behooves us to just change ourselves in order to be the best of us. So that as we begin to break psychological and generational curses, the children of our future are the answer, and that the future is alive and well.
I can't thank you both enough for your time today. I think Yusef is absolutely right that this book has the great potential to become a classic, and I can at least see the Amazon orders going a bit cracked now after this interview today. I want to thank you both so much. It's been an honor and a pleasure to speak to both of you, and I'm grateful for your time.
Thank you as well. My pleasure.